Picture a devout pilgrim standing before a massive cathedral in Europe, circa 1500. To him, that stone structure isn't just a building. It is the absolute, unshakable center of the universe. The authority of the church feels as physical and permanent as the ground beneath his feet. He trusts it implicitly, believing that this hierarchy is the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. If you told him that in just a few short years, this eternal monolith would crack, not from an invading army, but from a few sheets of paper spreading through the marketplaces, he would have laughed in your face. But then the narrative shifted. The printing press churned out new ideas, belief eroded, and suddenly the eternal legitimacy of the institution evaporated. The stone walls remained, but the shared consensus that held them up vanished, plunging the continent into chaos. That historical moment illustrates a terrifying truth about our modern world, one that we often ignore. We look at our democratic institutions, the UN, the Constitution, the global alliances, and we see concrete fortresses. But what if they are just as fragile as that 16th century cathedral? We are watching a similar phenomenon today. Disruptive leaders who aren't moving armies, but are hacking the collective story we tell ourselves about what is true and what is right. It begs the question, if the story changes, does the fortress simply disappear? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our objective today is to take a really hard look at the invisible architecture of political power. We're going to be analyzing how disruptive leaders and these alternative narratives they push are actively challenging the established consensus.
And not just the consensus, but the very idea of political legitimacy itself.
Exactly, both at home and, across the international stage. We're trying to step beyond the usual metrics, the tanks, the treaties, the trade balances, and really dive deep into this powerful framework of social construction.
It's a profound shift in focus, and it's, I think, absolutely necessary for understanding what's happening right now.
So we're asking you to consider the specific mechanisms that allow an entire shared political reality to be contested, redefined, and, ultimately broken down. What are the silent, intangible foundations holding up our political world, and how are they being chipped away?
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
Because when political science or, international relations focuses only on the material stuff, we miss the most important part.
Which is?
Which is that all power, at its root, rests on a shared agreement about what's real and what's right. The core idea of this constructivist framework is it's actually pretty straightforward, but it's also revolutionary.
Okay, lay it on us.
Power isn't just physical force. It's not just economic might. Fundamentally, it's about how we collectively build our reality through shared ideas, stories, and beliefs. The relationship between two countries, for example, whether they see each other as partners or rivals, is determined by the shared ideas they have about each other.
Anarchy is what states make of it.
That's the famous maxim, exactly. If states believe the world is cooperative, they act that way. If they believe it's hostile, well, they act accordingly. The reality they live in is one they have collectively authored.
So if the whole world order is basically a script, we, the citizens, are the actors. But I'm still looking at courts and armies and parliaments. They seem pretty physical to me. How does a script make them real?
The institutions are physical, yes, but their function is entirely social. A government building is just bricks and mortar until we, as citizens, collectively buy into its legitimacy.
We grant it authority.
We grant it the authority to rule. Every single day, we collectively enact this script of democracy or stability or order through habits that seem totally mundane. Obeying speed limits, trusting the currency in your wallet, showing up to vote, even just standing in line patiently. These are all small acts of faith in the system.
And if that faith disappears?
If the mass of people stops believing in the script, the institution loses its meaning and its power. Political legitimacy, really, is just the right of an authority to rule. And that right comes entirely from popular acceptance. If that belief system vanishes, the institution, just like your 16th century cathedral, becomes an empty shell. The stone walls don't matter anymore.
Okay, so what's the mechanism that holds that belief system together? We kept running into this term intersubjectivity. It sounds very academic, but you're saying it's the absolute core of this whole discussion.
It's the mortar. It's the glue holding the entire political world together. Intersubjectivity just describes the shared understanding that doesn't come from one person's head, that's subjectivity, or from some universal law of nature, that's objectivity.
It comes from interaction.
It emerges only from interaction. It's the common sense, the shared meanings we construct just by talking to each other, by living together. It's the invisible operating system of society. It's all the things we agree on without even realizing we're agreeing on them.
And it's not a single thing, right?
Right.
It exists on a spectrum. If we want to understand how it gets broken, we probably need to understand how it's built.
Precisely. On the most basic level, it's just two people recognizing they're both aware of each other. They agree on what a word means, or they both understand that they disagree about something. A deeper level is, the automatic behaviors we have, the unspoken expectations when you walk into a bank or talk to a police officer. But the level that defines political reality is the deepest one.
Which is?
The shared, totally taken for granted background assumptions of an entire thought community.
A thought community. That's a really useful way to frame it. But how do these communities form now? In this fragmented world? It used to be the village or the factory floor.
Historically, yes, they were physical. The union hall, the church, the people who read the same local newspaper. Today, they're often built by shared digital experiences or professional groups.
So a think tank could be a thought community.
A think tank, a specific academic field, or even the group of people who get the same algorithmic feed on their social media. They can all create these thought communities where the basic assumptions about, say, economics or justice are completely internalized and shared.
They're living in different realities because they're part of different thought communities.
Fundamentally different realities. Your most core political beliefs are not purely personal. They are artifacts of the thought communities you belong to.
And that shared identity, that's where the political leverage is.
Absolutely. Because this intersubjective world is tied directly to identity. Identities aren't born, they're built. They're anchored in culture and history. And identity matters because it tells you what your interests are.
Right. If you tell me you're a small business owner, I can guess what you think about taxes.
Or a veteran, or a progressive activist. It implies a whole set of interests. So when a disruptive leader successfully hacks the shared story, what they're really doing is targeting that core identity. They're trying to shift you from, say, taxpayer to victim of the deep state. And by doing that, they completely reorient your political interests.
This brings up the big philosophical question, though. When you talk about power being built on shared belief, it can sound, well, cynical. Like everything is relative and arbitrary. What stops a powerful person from just declaring a new reality that serves them?
And that is the absolute critical distinction we have to make. Constructivism acknowledges cultural relativity. It says that facts and beliefs depend on context. They're plural. But that has to be fiercely defended against pure arbitrariness.
The idea that it's just a free-for-all.
Exactly. The claim that beliefs can just follow whatever you wish for or whatever serves your interests. If we lose that distinction, democracy becomes impossible.
So if there's no objective, capital T truth we can all point to, how do we ground our political reality? How do we make it resilient against this kind of manipulation?
The grounding mechanism is what pragmatist philosophers call warranted assertability. It's not about finding some cosmic truth. It's about establishing truth through shared, transparent, and rigorous procedures.
Procedures.
Right. Warranted assertability means that any claim to truth has to be the product of an intersubjective process, methods, and criteria that we all agree on. It has to be transparent. It has to allow for open debate. It demands that you convince people with arguments and proof.
Okay, so what does a warranted procedure look like in the real world outside of a science lab?
They're actually all around us in a functioning democracy. The process of judicial review, for example. Claims are tested in court against established laws and evidence.
The editorial process in journalism.
That's another perfect one, where facts are supposed to be vetted by multiple sources. Or the peer review process in science and academia, where your ideas have to survive scrutiny from other experts.
So these are all systems for collective sense-making.
They're accountability systems. They ensure that knowledge isn't just decreed by one person. It's produced through a messy, challenging, but ultimately accountable process. So when a populist leader says, the election was rigged, I have no proof, just believe me, they are trying to short-circuit every single one of those warranted procedures. They're attacking the process of knowing.
And that's the narrative hack. It exploits this gap that exists in any democracy, the gap between the ideal and the reality.
Yes, exactly. There's what we could call democracy du jour, the democracy on paper,
right.
Laws, the rights, the institutions, the promises, and then there's democracy de facto, the actual lived experience of those conditions for the average person.
And when those two don't line up?
When the promises in the Constitution don't match your daily struggle, your financial anxiety, your feeling of powerlessness, you feel a deep sense of betrayal.
And that gap is the fertile ground.
It's where populism grows. Populism doesn't try to fix the systemic gap. It exploits the emotional disappointment. It offers these simple, illusory, black and white answers that cut through all the complexity. If your life feels complicated and unfair, a leader who says it's simple and it's their fault is offering you instant cognitive relief.
The complex old reality is broken, so you're ready for a simple new one.
You are highly susceptible to it. The feeling of being forgotten is weaponized.
Okay, let's unpack how that exploitation is being accelerated and weaponized right now, because the speed and the scale of this deconstruction they feel entirely new, and that's because of digital technology. This brings us to a really illustrative story, the experience of a retired worker we'll call Frank. Frank is our archetype here. His foundational reality just crumbled. For decades, his reality was structured by physical things. The 6 o'clock news, the guys at the union hall, the narrative he had, work hard, follow the rules, you'll be secure. It made sense.
It was a coherent story.
A coherent story. But then his factory closed, and those anchors were just gone. The story felt like a lie. He was adrift, looking for a new explanation for his pain. And he found it online, with a charismatic leader who was the ultimate modern storyteller.
And this is the genius of the modern political hack. It's using these digital platforms, this algorithmic amplification, to just rapidly accelerate the deconstruction of the old norms while simultaneously building a new, aggressive consensus.
Frank wasn't necessarily looking for fake news, was he? He was looking for meaning.
He was looking for relevance in a world that he felt had discarded him. And the critical point is, once he started to engage with that alternative narrative, the system itself took over. The algorithmic amplification became a perpetual mirror. It reflected his pain back to him, but it also perfected it.
We need to talk about how that algorithm works as this new mediator of reality. It used to be neighbors arguing over a fence. Now it's code deciding what's true.
Absolutely. The algorithm creates these incredibly powerful echo chambers. It learns Frank's biases, his fears, his anger, and then it feeds him this relentless, reinforced loop of content.
Videos of crumbling cities.
Juxtaposed with these high-energy, inspiring rallies of the new leader promising to fix it all overnight. This feedback loop does two things. First, it constantly validates his emotions. Your pain is real. You are right to be angry.
And second,
it isolates him. By isolating him, the intersubjectivity, that shared reality, just shatters. He no longer shares a common set of facts with his neighbor because his neighbor is getting a completely different algorithmic feed.
So the goal of the populist leader is to use these platforms not just to campaign, but to fundamentally deconstruct the norms of democracy: civility, expertise, trust in institutions.
They're all reframed. They're labeled as tools of oppression, wielded by some powerful, shadowy, deep state. The old rules are reframed as a scam.
And that's what allows for the identity shift. Frank stops being a forgotten worker and becomes something with agency, with meaning. He's a patriot warrior fighting a corrupt conspiracy.
And that identity reconstruction is the moment of political conversion. When algorithms split us into different realities, one where institutions are flawed but trustworthy, another where they're irredeemably corrupt, the whole idea of we the people breaks down. It becomes warring thought communities.
So Frank's anger in that context is actually a rational response to the world he's being shown.
It's a perfectly rational response to the world as it has been meticulously constructed for him online. The world he sees demands immediate, aggressive action outside the normal rules.
And the leaders pushing this new reality, they rely on a very specific rhetorical strategy. They're trying to establish what the literature calls a complete regime of truth.
This is a direct assault on those warranted procedures we talked about. This brand of populism tries to dominate reality by defining true and false in these incredibly simple, one-sided ways. They privilege emotion, insinuation, and opinion over any kind of rigorous justification or evidence.
They don't just argue against the procedures, they try to make them irrelevant.
Exactly. They eliminate the need for them by just labeling all critics as liars, enemies of the people, or purveyors of fake news.
It's pure Foucault. The link between power and knowledge.
It really is. Foucault's idea of the will to truth is that any claim to truth is tangled up in power relations. When you hear rhetoric like alternative facts, it's not just a lie. It's a power move. It's an attempt to establish a new regime of truth where the leader's voice is the only valid source of reality.
And that just bypasses the whole democratic process of debate and proof.
It centralizes truth, which is fundamentally anti-democratic.
The sources we looked at draw this really fascinating parallel, treating this whole maneuver like applying market mechanisms to politics. The idea is that political claims are now being treated like products, and they're subject to the same distortions we see in the marketplace: illusion, deception, and fraud.
It's a powerful analogy because it gets at the core tension between capitalism, which is about pursuing profitable interests, and democracy, which is supposed to be about pursuing general interests and human rights.
So if a leader treats the country like a company,
Then the rules of marketing apply. And we can categorize these political distortions along that same commercial spectrum.
okay, let's start at the bottom. Illusion.
Illusion is your baseline distortion. It's standard commercial advertising. You're sugarcoating, you're exaggerating, you're suggesting imaginary advantages over your competitors.
It's not strictly false, but it's not the whole truth.
Right. Politically, this is the glossy brochure for a policy. A leader promises unprecedented wealth or immediate security, suggesting these perfect, idealized benefits while, completely omitting the complexity, the cost, the trade-offs. It's creating hope that's divorced from reality.
And the next step up is deception. This is where it gets more intentional.
With deception, you have a measurable increase in distortion. It's about intentionally misleading the voters. This means stirring up specific, one-sided assumptions while actively denying documented facts.
The famous alternative facts moment about the inauguration crowd size comes to mind.
That's the textbook example. You had diverse independent sources all documenting one reality, and the administration just obtrusively maintained a contradictory one. This lives in a kind of legal gray area in market societies. It's not quite fraud, but it's a clear attempt to manipulate the shared reality by just denying verifiable data. The goal is to enforce your narrative, period.
And finally, you get to fraud, the criminal level.
Fraud is where you cross into clearly criminal acts designed to get political gain through illegal means. In a democracy, when you see a consistent pattern of illusion and deception, observers often conclude it's part of a larger, systemic, anti-democratic agenda. Fraud here isn't just about money, it's about destroying democratic principles, undermining the rule of law, and circumventing those warranted procedures we need for governance.
The line between a commercial scam and a political operation just dissolves.
It completely dissolves, and the engine driving all of this is what you could call the populist identity interest loop. It's how economic anxiety gets turned into political fuel.
This is what transforms Frank.
It's exactly what transforms Frank. Constructivism reminds us that, economic problems, not having enough money, losing your job, they only get their meaning from the shared story we tell about them.
They have to be framed.
And populists are masters at framing. They frame economic anxiety not as a complex structural problem, but as a simple, targeted threat caused by an external enemy. They identify another globalization, immigrants, a trade deal, to incite fear and resentment.
So voters can cleanly attribute their problems to this outside force.
Instead of the ambiguities of modern capitalism or policy failures, it's politically efficient. Why debate tax policy when you can just debate the threat of the outsider?
And this drives intense support for the leader offering the simple, strong solution.
Exactly. And that reinforces the new identity, the patriot identity, centered on security against this other. And that's the loop. Anxiety creates fear, fear creates support for the simple answer, and the simple answer reinforces the new identity. That is how you rewrite shared meaning on a massive scale.
So if this is how the foundations of reality are being attacked digitally at home, we need to broaden our scope. We need to look at how this plays out on the international stage. Because global powers are contesting the established system, the liberal international order, by promoting entirely different intersubjective realities. And this brings us to the perspective of someone we'll call Wei, a diplomat.
The challenge to the global order is, at its heart, a constructivist challenge, because the liberal international order, the LIO, is itself a social construct. It's not just a pile of treaties, it's a shared meaning system.
And it's characterized by three interlocking elements, right? Power, principles, and practice.
Correct. Power is the hierarchy. Who sets the agenda? Who has veto power? Who is seen as a responsible leader? Principles are the norms and values, the shared vision of the good life. Things like multilateralism, democracy, human rights. And practice is the physical stuff. The UN, the World Bank, the alliances.
And the LIO is in crisis because all three are under attack at the same time.
Simultaneously. For decades, the LIO relied on this broad consensus that cooperation leads to progress, that sovereignty should be tempered by international rules, and that open markets create prosperity.
But disruptive global leaders are now treating those norms as optional.
Which is a death blow to a system based on shared agreement. When powerful states start prioritizing immediate transactional national gain over following the long-established rules, the whole thing becomes unstable. The rules are only followed when they're convenient.
We can see this very clearly in China's strategic goals for global governance.
China's posture has fundamentally changed. Previous generations might have focused on a more defensive strategy of hide and bide, focus on domestic growth, keep your head down. But since around 2013, the strategy has become much more proactive, much more ambitious.
The goal isn't just to join the club anymore.
The goal is to actively reshape global governance so it better aligns with China's values and interests. The ambition is to promote its own model of stability and development as a legitimate, coherent, and frankly, highly effective alternative to the Western model.
And their activity on the global stage has just exploded.
It's undeniable. You see it everywhere, from massive infrastructure projects like the Belt and Road Initiative to proactive engagement on climate change and international security. They're now the third largest contributor to the UN's regular budget and the second largest for peacekeeping.
That's a serious commitment.
It signals a real willingness to take on global leadership and to steer the international conversation. The aim is to promote socialism with Chinese characteristics as a viable path for other nations, especially in the developing world, who want rapid growth and stability.
So if we try to see the world from, the diplomat's perspective, we can really start to understand the alternative narrative that's being offered. How does that narrative critique the liberal international order?
From the Forbidden City perspective, the traditional Western liberal model is often seen as, entropy. It's viewed as a kind of inherent political and social chaos. Wei sees Western systems as paralyzed by internal political fights, by short-term election cycles that prevent any real long-term planning, and by a divisive focus on individual rights over collective stability. This view contrasts very sharply with the stability, efficiency, and the demonstrable results of the Chinese system.
And those demonstrable results are a very powerful part of the counter-narrative.
Hugely powerful. The Chinese model promotes a story rooted in what you could call civilizational exceptionalism. It contrasts the perceived instability of the West with China's internal cohesion and these massive state-led achievements, the high-speed rail, the large-scale poverty alleviation.
For a nation struggling with chaos, that has to be a compelling story.
It is. It's a narrative of stability and tangible results rooted in absolute state sovereignty and a focus on collective security and economic rights. It offers an alternative path that Western systems, with all their internal debates, often can't match.
And this alternative reality isn't just being promoted externally. It's being subtly coded into the very language of global governance, inside institutions like the UN.
This is a very strategic, very subtle form of constructivist action. China is actively working to introduce specific, carefully chosen language into UN resolutions and official documents to shift the global discourse.
Phrases like community of shared future for human beings.
Or putting a heavy emphasis on mutual respect and win-win cooperation. On the surface, the language seems harmless, even positive, but it carries profound diplomatic weight.
How so?
By emphasizing concepts like collective security and, critically, the right to development over traditional Western ideas of individual liberty and political rights, they are reinforcing the foundational principles of their own governance model.
National sovereignty, non-intervention.
And economic progress as the primary human right. They are effectively changing the intersubjective definition of what good global governance means from the inside out.
And their expanding economic power gives them the leverage to make these changes stick.
The economic influence is the hard power behind the soft narrative. China uses its growing leveraged strategic investments, trade partnerships that don't come with political conditions, to gain diplomatic support and quiet criticism.
Developing countries, I imagine, appreciate that approach.
Many appreciate the focus on stability and economic partnership without the moral or political lectures that often come with Western aid. It makes the Chinese vision a credible, attractive alternative.
So at the end of the day, the Sino-American rivalry and the crisis of the LIO in general, it's really a war over the narrative of what makes a government legitimate.
Precisely. It's a battle between two coherent but fundamentally opposed stories about what makes a government legitimate and what defines a stable world. China offers a stable, results-oriented, state-sovereign vision. The traditional LIO offers a rule-based, multilateral vision based on liberal democratic norms. The outcome of this rivalry will define the next shared reality for a huge portion of the world.
Okay, so given that the very foundations of political reality are under attack, digitally at home, diplomatically abroad, we have to turn to the defense. How do institutions and individuals reinforce the fortress? The sources all point toward resilience, but not just political resilience, a deeper, almost psychological process.
That is the crucial link. We have to understand resilience as the capacity of any agent, a state, an organization, a person, to continuously cope with and adapt to change while remaining, fit for purpose. The LIO was successful for decades because it was resilient. It could absorb shocks and adapt.
But there's a paradox, right? Institutions that are too stable, what the literature calls sticky institutions, they can't adapt. Their strength becomes a weakness.
That's the vulnerability of entrenched stability. We like stability. It gives us cognitive consistency, which is comforting. But if those institutions are too rigid, if they fail to adapt to new realities, they stop being fit for purpose, and they risk a catastrophic collapse when a major challenge finally hits.
So to avoid that, to be able to adapt, agents need a strong psychological foundation. They need what's called ontological security.
Exactly. Ontological security, it's the security of the self. It sounds like an individual concept, but it scales up to the level of a state.
How does it anchor a political system?
In a political context, it means having a stable, coherent collective identity that's supported by a recognized national narrative. It provides what's called basic trust. If an agent, a leader, a government feels secure in its identity and its story about the world, it has the psychological capacity to engage in adaptive, reflective action when faced with external threats.
They can deal with the crisis because they aren't also fighting for their own definition of reality.
Right. But when that security is breached, that's where the danger lies. Persistent crisis, rapid change, disruptive events, they generate intense anxiety and insecurity. And this causes those agents, the policymakers and diplomats, to turn inward. They start engaging in ontological security seeking.
They're just trying to hold on to their sense of self.
They spend all their energy reestablishing their stable identity and their coherent story. And during that period of intense self-focus, their capacity for clear adaptive action externally just plummets. The crisis gets worse because the people who are supposed to fix it are too busy defending their own reality.
Which suggests that individual citizens and civil society have a profound role to play in maintaining that collective security just by affirming the existing narrative. This is where the micro-rituals of resistance come in. And it's perfectly illustrated by the story of Sarah, the librarian. Sarah's story is all about the quiet power of institutional ritual. She wasn't out there making grand political statements. She was a poll worker, and she had every reason to feel anxious with all the noise and disruption happening. But she just leaned into the ritual of her job with this exaggerated, almost sacred precision.
And that act itself becomes a potent counter-narrative to the chaos. The script she followed, the quiet voice, the precise way she handled the ballot, the privacy sleeves, all those small actions together perform the ceremony of democracy convincingly.
She was demonstrating that despite all the noise, the system itself was still operating on its core legitimate principles.
She was affirming the collective story. And the power of that performance is entirely social. A polling station is just a school gym. Its authority is 100% based on our shared agreement that it is a polling station.
And by performing that ritual with such fidelity, she constructed an immediate local reality.
She forced the disruptors to step into her reality even if they came there to tear it down. They had to get in line, follow the rules of the space, respect the process. Her steadfast adherence reinforced the system's legitimacy at the most basic level. She was physically demonstrating that the rules still apply here.
These micro-rituals are like the daily maintenance of our shared reality.
They counteract the forces of marketization by just asserting procedural fairness and accountability one person at a time.
So beyond these individual rituals, what are the structural defenses? How do you maintain legitimacy against the tactics of illusion, deception, and fraud?
Structurally, legitimacy is maintained through the mechanisms of institutional accountability, guaranteed financial transparency, stakeholder accountability, procedural fairness that's actually built into the law. These are the barriers against the marketization of politics. If the public knows the numbers are transparent and the procedures are fair, the populist story that the system is rigged just loses its power.
But there's a more fundamental level that has to be met first.
There is. You have to address the most basic layer first: foundational legitimacy. Before we can expect people to fully engage in the complex debates around what we call contingent legitimacy voting rights, free speech, democratic reforms, a government must first ensure the basic safety and security of its citizens.
You mean food, water, shelter?
Food, clean water, shelter, and security from violence. If foundational legitimacy fails, the whole system collapses. Because human beings become overwhelmed by survival needs and immediate anxiety. When your basic trust, your ontological security is broken because you're afraid of starving or getting hurt, your capacity for higher-level democratic engagement just disappears.
You're not worried about procedural fairness when you're worried about your next meal.
You revert to seeking simple, strong, immediate answers, which makes you hyper-susceptible to populist leaders who promise simple security fixes, even if those fixes dismantle your democratic rights. The complex system can't survive if the simple physiological needs of its people are not met.
And this brings our whole conversation full circle. The crisis we're seeing today, whether it's in the liberal international order or in our domestic democracies, it's not some inevitable decay. It is, at its core, a profound and active crisis of narrative.
It's a struggle between a multilateral, cooperative, rule-based vision and a transactional, immediate, self-interested vision. And this means the institutions themselves, the UN, our constitutions, are vulnerable precisely because powerful people are choosing to treat their norms as optional, or worse, as tools of an enemy.
Resilience then rests entirely on collective faith.
It rests on a faith that is constantly being manufactured through these successful micro-rituals and transparent procedures. We have to see that crises of legitimacy are not just moments of decay, they are always, at the same time, moments of profound authorship. The shared story is being written right now by every action we take or fail to take. Ultimately, lasting power, stability, and legitimate order are not rooted in the material world, not in the concrete of a cathedral, the steel of a tank, or the paper of a treaty. They are rooted in the collective, intersubjective story we agree to tell ourselves about what is true, what is right, and who we collectively are.
Understanding that power is rooted in shared fiction and not static inheritance places a profound responsibility on all of us. The world order, whether democratic, liberal, or otherwise, is not something passive that we simply inherit. It is something we are all actively, discursively constructing, demolishing, or rebuilding every single day, with every action, every algorithm, and every adherence to ritual. The institutions that define our lives are only as permanent as the shared fiction that sustains them.